And we talked last week about the Transfiguration. We didn't quite get through everything I wanted to say about that. We kind of covered for the most part, but I had a few more things I wanted to say. Well, I have a lot more that I want to say, but for time's sake, we're gonna have to eventually move on from it. Y'all don't tell Miss Joyce. I brought some coffee in here, but it's either that or I'm going to have to get somebody to teach for me because I've had the worst time just with sinuses and my throat bothering me. At least that's my story, and I'm sticking to it. So, but seriously, I thought I've got to either have a cough drop or something in my mouth constantly, or I'm going to have to bring something to drink to class. So I brought something to drink with me. But we began talking about the Transfiguration. Oh, and before I forget, I was talking to somebody last week, mentioned this is kind of a neat, useful thing, I think, for folks. If you have a cell phone, and I dare say most everybody does, most people even are going to have, the vast majority even are going to have a smartphone of some kind. But, you know, I had not really given this a whole lot of thought till it got mentioned, but you can actually go on, what did you say it was, Google Earth? And I think an Android phone is going to be on there automatically. If an Apple phone, you may have to add that app, but it's a free app either way. And you can actually go on Google Earth to Palestine. And you can look at these places, and you can see the one that you said you looked at was... Mm-hmm.
And actually looked it up, and one of the other mountains was 14,000 feet.
I think it was Hermon, you said. Mount Hermon you were looking at?
Tabor, I think.
Tabor, okay.
But you were talking about one class, I forget when it was, and I looked, and from sea level to the mountain, you could see it on Google Earth. It was 14,000 and some odd feet. That's almost 3 miles up. So when it says Jesus goes up into the mountain,
Yeah.
some of these mountains are not little hills.
Right. And so, yeah, but that's pretty interesting. I had never really thought about that, but you can get on Google Earth, and you could go, and you could even get to like a satellite view of these places. And you know, I was just thinking about that and comparing it when I had Bible geography and looking at maps. You know, it's quite a different thing, but that's pretty neat. And you know, you can see some of these mountains. I don't think I mentioned it last week, but saying Mount Tabor reminds me that's what a lot of people, there are a lot of folks that speculate. You know, again, we don't know for sure which mountain it was. Foster, in his studies in the life of Christ, makes a good case for Mount Hermon, but there have been others who make a pretty good case for Mount Tabor. But both of those are very high mountains, and Mount Hermon particularly has a place where you're not too far from the top, but you're not like at the pinnacle of the mountain. And there's kind of, I forget the word that Foster uses, maybe something similar to like vista or something, like there's a flattened out spot that would have been, you know, an ideal location for this transfiguration to have taken place. Again, we don't know that for sure, but it certainly would have worked and made sense. But, you know, I did want to mention that because that is a very good tool that you have, most of us have right in the palms of our hands. If you have an iPad or something like that, you can see it even better, a little bit bigger screen. And of course, if you're at home and want to look, you can get on Google Earth, I don't know, on a desktop, laptop, computer, whatever, and you can do the same thing and see that. And you can zoom in, you can zoom out, see what it looks like from more of a distance, see what it looks like when you're really zoomed in, and it's a pretty interesting thing. But it was, either one of these mountains, it's a climb. And so you begin to understand. Sometimes people say, you know, well, you know, you're looking at Luke's account, a week to go up the mountain? Well, it's not. They're not going up a hill. I remember when we first moved to Bremen, my kids called the hill back here behind the building, they called that the mountain. And then, you know, we'd been here for a little bit, and this hill over here kind of getting toward Creekside subdivision, that was the mountain. Where y'all been? Been looking for you. We were in the mountains. That's what they'd tell us. And so we knew what that meant. But that's not what this is. This is a, Jerry Clower would say, a show-nuff mountain. I mean, it was huge. And so it was quite a climb. And, you know, that effort, that strain. As Tim pointed out, you're almost 3 miles above sea level. So you begin to understand maybe as well why they were so sleepy. There probably were other factors as well, but that certainly would have come into play as well. Go ahead.
To appreciate what you're seeing on Google Earth, Google your own address. And when you see how it's exactly the way it is that day, you realize that when you look at that, it is as accurate as it will be what you're looking at your own address.
Yeah, you can even go to your own address on Google Earth and see. It's a little bit, it's almost unsettling sometimes, and you see that, and you can rotate that view around, street level and things like that. It does. It's got a lot of options there. So yeah, it's a little bit odd. So yeah, but that's a great tool that you could use. I'd not ever thought about that. I use that for so many different things. My buddy and I, that we like to go camping on the Tallapoosa, we've actually been able to use Google Earth and get exact mileage that we're going and things like that. But I've never thought to use it for Bible geography. But man, what a great use that is for it. All right, so continuing on talking about the Transfiguration, as I said, I just want to mention a few other things that we didn't get to cover talking about this. Remember, I think it kind of goes without saying, but just want to point out, Jesus was transfigured, not Moses and Elijah, obviously. What form they took, I don't know. It just doesn't tell us. That's uncertain. Luke 9:31 does tell us they appeared in glory. So what that means exactly, we don't really know. Here's something interesting that I think was in my father-in-law's notes. I'd not really thought about this before either. Moses and Elijah both spoke with God on Mount Sinai. Now, Moses, we know, that's kind of a famous event when he goes up to receive the law. But I had to think about Elijah a little bit. I thought, Elijah was Mount Carmel. But in chapter 19, as you recall, after the great victory on Mount Carmel, Elijah flees from Jezebel. The Lord comes to him. There's the fire, there's the wind, but God speaks to him in that still small voice. And then he strengthens him, gives him food, nourishment, and he goes where? The Bible says to Mount Horeb, the Mount of God. Well, if you recall from other classes, sermons, Horeb is another name for Mount Sinai. So Elijah went there in chapter 19. That's verse 8 where he goes to the Mount of God and he speaks to God there. And God is going to tell him, Elijah, you're not the only one. Remember Elijah, he was, before making that journey, his complaint was, just take my life, Lord. I'm the only one left. And he says, no, you're not. I've reserved 7,000 and haven't bowed the knee to Baal. So Elijah and Moses both spoke with God on Mount Sinai, but now Jesus speaks with God on Mount Sinai. With God the Father, of course. And again, you have to go to Luke's account because Luke 9:28 tells us there that Jesus is praying. So he's speaking to the Father here on Mount Sinai. So I thought that's pretty interesting. And Moses and Elijah, their appearance here, they're talking with Jesus, tells us they're still alive even after their physical death. And we see that, an Old Testament example of that with 1 Samuel 28. Samuel speaking to Saul and what we sometimes call the Witch of Endor. Sometimes people will say this, and I was trying to think where I heard this recently, and I can't recall exactly where I heard it. I don't want to misquote somebody, so I'm not even going to. I think I remember where I heard it, but I don't want to say it because I'm not confident enough, and I don't want to attribute that to somebody erroneously. But sometimes you'll hear people make statements to the effect of that they didn't understand, or the Jews didn't have this belief in life after death. I do know at one point, I can't remember exactly who it was, but on one occasion when I was at the Biblical History Center, one of the guides made a statement to that effect, and that they would have this idea that Mot, that was the god of the underworld, and he would come up and eat the flesh from a dead body, and that was why, after a while, a body was no longer a body, it was just bones, because Mot had been feasting on the flesh of this corpse. And of course, they learned better they learned later on that it's just decomposition, but they didn't have this belief in the afterlife. Folks, that's nonsense. If you think that, you're not studying, you're not getting that from the Old Testament. And sometimes people will just repeat things. It's kind of like evolution. Sometimes people repeat things that they've heard, even things that have been debunked and shown to be false many, many years previously. Haeckel, this guy that was proven to have forged drawings. Maybe you remember, most of us my age, may even be some kids now, sadly, but if you're my age, you probably remember studying in some of your science books about how these embryos were similar between a human and this animal and that animal, and you look at that and you could see, oh yeah, look at that. They must have evolved from a common source, right? Well, guess what? Oh, Haeckel was a fraud. He just did those drawings by hand. They weren't even, he just altered it to make it look like evolution, try to bolster evolution. They found out, they fired him from his university where he was working. But you know what you still see sometimes, even to this day in science textbooks? Some of those drawings. So sometimes people just repeat things. But one of the things that you'll sometimes hear people repeat without even knowing what they're talking about is, well, the Jews just had no concept of the afterlife. Yes, they did. In fact, even as far back as Job. Do you remember when Job was written? Now it's getting on in the middle part, maybe even the latter middle part of your Old Testament. But when was Job written? It's early. In fact, well, at least the events, I don't know exactly when it was written, that's a little bit more difficult to determine, but the events happened probably just after the flood, at least not too long after the flood, because you still have some dinosaurs, the behemoth, the leviathan, that type of creature. So even as far back as Job, he says, I know that my Redeemer lives. And he says, I know I'm going to stand before him one day. I'll see him in my flesh. In other words, he understood there's going to be a bodily resurrection. Are you going to tell me they had no concept of the afterlife? He's talking about a resurrection. Some people will say that. They may not say specifically no concept of the afterlife, but they'll say, well, the Jews didn't have this. Jesus talking about the resurrection is a new idea. It's not a new idea. So, in fact, Daniel 12 mentions that as well, that idea of a resurrection. Yes, sir?
David had relations with Bathsheba. The child died. David knew nothing about the afterlife. He said, if I so live my life, I shall see the child.
Yeah, David says, David and Bathsheba, Tim mentioned that David's child, that was part of the punishment. The child is going to die, and he's fasting, he's praying while the child is ill. And when they come to him, they're scared to even tell him that the child is dead. He figures it out. He says, the child's dead, isn't he? Well, yes, he is. David gets up, he washes himself, he eats. They say, that's almost like they're almost scandalized by that. And they say, what are you doing? And he says, well, when the child was still alive, I'm fasting, I'm praying, who knows, maybe the Lord will be gracious to me. But now the child has died, and I can't do anything about that. I can't bring him back. But I shall go to him. And he says, I'll see him again. Again, like you said, don't tell me they didn't have any concept of the afterlife. He says, I'm going to go to him. But this shows they were still in existence. They were still alive in that sense after their physical death. I touched on it last week. They're speaking, Luke 9:31 tells us with Jesus about his decease, is the way the King James renders that in Luke 9:31. It's the Greek word exodus or exodos. It simply means a departure, a going out. And I like what Foster says. It entails a lot more than just his death. And that's why Foster was saying he's not crazy about the translation there, decease, his decease. Because when you read that, that just kind of entails, encapsulates his death. But there's a whole lot more in play there than just his death. His exodus involves his death, his resurrection, and eventually his ascension back into heaven, and he's going to come before the Father and receive his glory, his kingdom. Here's another question that the text just doesn't give us an answer to, but I'll point it out just to make that point. There are some amazing heroes in the Old Testament, are there not? I mean, I could go around the room probably and say, pick two characters for the Old Testament. God is going to put his stamp of approval once again on Jesus as his son, as as the authoritative one, the one with all power, all authority. But on the Mount of Transfiguration, 2 people from the Old Testament. And we could just go around the room or have everybody write down 2 people on a piece of paper, and we'd probably get no telling how many different people, individuals. Some people might say, Abraham, father of the faithful. Oh, look at Noah. I mean, out of the entire population of the earth, Noah and his family, the only ones who were faithful. We might go through all these different people. God chose Moses and Elijah. Why those 2? I don't know. The Bible doesn't tell us. Some people speculate, Moses, the great lawgiver, giving the law of Moses, Elijah representing the prophets, and the Jews used that division to basically encapsulate the Old Testament, the law, the prophets, and sometimes they would include the writings. Sometimes they'd have a separate division called the writings, which would be like what we would call poetry or wisdom literature. But that's basically saying the Old Testament. You have Moses, the law, Elijah, the prophets. But again, I can't say that with 100% certainty. Peter is afraid. Mark 9, 5, and 6. He doesn't know. He doesn't know what to say. And we talked about this when we studied personalities. The sanguine personality, one of the things they hate more than anything is silence. And so sometimes they speak because they just don't know what else to do, and that silence is awkward. And here's Peter, and he's intimidated, and got to say something, right? Let's just build 3 tabernacles, Lord. 1 for you, 1 for Moses, 1 for Elijah. And of course, then you get to verses 5 and 6. While he yet spake, this bright cloud overshadows them. Behold, a voice out of the cloud. That's, of course, the Father speaking. This is my beloved Son, in whom I'm well pleased. Hear ye him. Of course, when they hear it, the disciples, they fall on their faces. They're afraid, even more afraid. Jesus says in John 5:37 that the Father witnessed of him. He's going to list several witnesses there in John 5. One of those, of course, was the Father. That was the first witness. Here in this instance, the Father confessed Jesus as his Son. This is my beloved Son. The Father did that also at the baptism of Jesus, as you recall. Peter is later going to quote the Father's confession here on the Mount of Transfiguration and say that Jesus received from the Father honor and glory at that time. When the Father says, hear ye him, it says to us, it tells us it is God's will that we listen to and follow his Son. Now, if that is God's will, and it is, then we cannot please the Father if we believe in the deity of Christ. Yea, even if we call him Lord and do not the things that he says to do. In fact, Jesus himself on one occasion says that. Why do you call me Lord, Lord, and do not the things which I say? You think about the untold multitudes. I'm not talking about those who are seeking to follow him and they struggle, they stumble. I'm talking about people who just say, I believe Jesus is Lord. Absolutely, I'm a Christian. I'm a disciple. Don't lift a finger to assemble, to study or read his word, to do what he would have them to do. They get in a situation where they have 2 choices. They can react in how they just naturally want to react. Maybe somebody smacks them upside the head. Well, what's our natural instinct? I mean, do you really need me to answer that? Our natural instinct is let them have it right back, right? And so how many people? Oh, I'm a Christian. But something like that happens, what do? They give it right back. They're not turning the other cheek. Somebody acts ugly going down the highway, makes an obscene gesture. They give it right back. That's not pleasing the Father, though. He says, this is my Son, hear ye him. Doesn't say just call him Lord. But how many people do that? And I mean, no effort whatsoever. I think I've told you before, when I was 18 years old, first real job, if you want to call it that I had. I had a lot of real jobs working for Mama. In fact, some of the jobs I worked after that I thought were pretty easy compared to some of the work she put me through and my Uncle Ted. Good night. But the first job I had working for the man, how about that, was at Hardee's in Heflin. And I worked with a lady that she would tell them, you don't put me down on Sunday, I'll quit, I'll walk out. Sunday's for the Lord. I'm going to church. I'm a Christian. And, buddy, you let somebody come in and they complain or be a little bit ugly to her. And, I mean, I'm talking, she's an employee. And she could make a sailor blush with some of the language that came out of her mouth. And I'm just like, are you kidding me? And then turn around in the same breath and, she'd be, thank you, Jesus. Oh, I love Jesus. I'm a Christian and all this stuff, and humming her gospel songs as she walks around. And I'm like, you have got to be kidding. When I was 18 years old, wasn't exactly a faithful Christian myself at that time, but I'm thinking, good night. I knew better than that. Father says, hear ye him. This is the age in which God speaks to men, to us, to mankind, through his Son. That's Hebrews 1, 1 and 2, really 1 through 3. So we need to hear him. We need to listen to him and follow his teachings, do what he would have us do. Well, verse 7, Jesus came. I love, there's no word in the Bible by accident. Jesus came and touched them. There's something about the power of human touch. Maybe you're upset and somebody comes and gives you a hug. Maybe you're upset and somebody comes and they just put their hand on your back, put their hand on your shoulder. It's powerful. So Jesus comes and he touched them and he says, arise and be not afraid. When Jesus is with us, there's no need to be afraid, is there? They only saw Jesus when they lifted up their eyes. You see that in verse 8? We read about a lot of people in the Bible. Again, a lot of great heroes, a lot of great examples. But more than anything else, and I'm not saying don't look at those folks because they're given to us for examples, right? Romans 15:4. But more than anything else, we need to see Jesus only, in the sense of he is our focus, he's our standard. I don't say, well, I'm not perfect, but boy, compared to old King Manasseh, I'm doing pretty well. Well, but King Manasseh's not my standard. I'm not perfect, but compared to some of these people over here in the world, or this hypocritical member of the church, I'm doing pretty well. But that's not my standard. We need to look up and see Jesus. He's our standard. He's our example. He needs to be our focus. It's interesting because the time is coming when they're going to tell the Jews first, and then Samaria, then the uttermost parts of the world, that Jesus is the Christ. But at this time, Jesus says, verse 9, tell the vision to no man until the Son of Man be risen again from the dead. He says, don't tell anybody about this until after the resurrection. Now, they don't understand exactly what he's talking about when he mentions the resurrection. Mark tells us that, Mark 9 and 10 in his account. It's also worth pointing out before we move on that Jesus calls what they saw a vision, there in verse 9. However, that's not to say that what they saw is not real, that this is just a vision that they all three happen to have simultaneously. Because Mark records Mark 9, verse 9, Jesus says, it mentions there, the things that they had seen. So they saw this. This is not just an imaginary, we just happen to have the same vision. Jesus is using that metaphorical term. So much more we can say about the Transfiguration. It's just one of these amazing events in the Bible. And again, as I think I said this last week, when I get to heaven, I just want to be able to see that and experience that as it would have been to be right there, part of it. And maybe the Lord will let us do that. I don't know. But I would love to get to experience that and see it, because what an occasion it must have been. Verses 10 through 13. John is the Elijah who is to come. Sir.
Real quick. Do we have any idea of how they knew who Moses and Elijah was? Because, these men did not live in your time dispensation. They didn't have a forward picture of them. So my assumption has always been it was a revelation to them. But in the text, it just says that Peter looks up and says, Lord, it's good that we're here.
Yeah, and I'm glad you mentioned that, because I meant to bring that out as well, and I had forgotten. I meant to bring it out just to point out that we don't know. I don't know that there's any way to say. The question was, how did Peter, James, and John, Peter specifically mentions it, but I'm assuming James and John knew as well. How did they know this was Moses and Elijah? I don't think they're wearing like stickers that say, hi, my name is Moses. they've been dead for hundreds of years. It's not like Peter goes, I know him anywhere. That's Moses. They don't know what they look like. They didn't have photographs of them. If Abraham Lincoln were to come walking in here, even somebody dressed like him, we'd recognize that because we've seen photographs of him, even though he's been dead for a long time. But how did they know? I don't know. My best guess is somehow it was revealed, or maybe there's other conversation they were having with Jesus that's not revealed to us that they deduced from the conversation. I don't know, but it is interesting, and it's one of those things that it's not gonna affect salvation or the text, but be interesting just to know. I guess we can add that to our bucket list of we'll live right and go to heaven and ask the Lord when we get there. Hey, how'd they know? My best guess is probably Revelation. It was somehow revealed to them. So when you get into 10 through 13, Jesus is going to talk about that, or the disciples are going to ask a question first. Why then say the scribes that Elias or Elijah must first come? Probably because of having seen Moses and Elijah on the mount. It's got them thinking about this. Jesus had talked about this earlier, as you recall, in chapter 11. But now it's probably just on their mind because they just saw Elijah on the mountain. They're kind of probably like, oh, yeah, what about Elijah? The scribes keep saying probably what has happened here. And again, I don't know that I can say this with certainty. But probably, and I think it might even be fair to say most likely, the Pharisees have been saying to Jesus' disciples, he ain't the Christ. Look, where is Elijah? If he's the Christ, where is Elijah? Oh, it's right here in Malachi. What is it? Malachi 4, 5, and 6. It's right here. Elijah's got to come first. Where is Elijah? He ain't the Messiah. And maybe they're planting some seeds of doubt, even within the minds of his own apostles and disciples. So now that it's on their mind, and they say, what about that? I mean, they say Elijah's got to come first. Maybe, here's what another person said, it might be that they were wondering if Jesus is the Messiah and Elijah is to come first, why is Elijah just now appearing? Like as if they thought the Mount of Transfiguration appearance of Elijah was, he's just now appearing. Wait a minute. We've been thinking Jesus is the Christ, and he says he's the Christ. And he says, when Peter confessed him, blessed art thou, flesh and blood is not revealed unto you, but my Father which is in heaven. So, but wait a minute, time out. Why is Elijah just now appearing? So that could be the case. Or, another person suggested, they might have thought, okay, Elijah has appeared. Why did he go away? Why didn't he stay and come and start preparing the way for Jesus? Because he is the Messiah. He is the Christ. Foster is the one, R.C. Foster in his book, suggests that the scribes were likely trying to discredit Jesus with the apostles at every chance they got, and they may have planted this idea. He's not the Christ because Elijah hasn't come. So maybe they're just sort of scratching their head like, yeah, this just doesn't quite add up. Jesus says, yes, Elijah must come. He truly shall first come and restore all things, but I say unto you, Elias, again, that's just another way of, it's kind of a Koine Greek way of saying Elijah, that Elijah has come already, and they knew him not, but have done unto him whatsoever they listed. Likewise also shall the Son of Man suffer of them. Look, verse 13 is key. I had this question one time I was filling in on the GBN Q&A program, and I got this one. Somebody said, they were really struggling with this about John the Baptist, and was he Elijah? Was he not? What did it mean when Elijah's going to come and restore all things? And they even went like really way beyond with that, and like this phrase, restore all things. They were making, some wild suggestions with that, and, if not, why not type question. Well, verse 13 is the answer. I mean, it's the key. Then the disciples understood that he spake unto them of John the Baptist, or John the Baptizer. Well, that deals with all the crazy ideas. John came to prepare the way, and that's what the prophesied one was going to do. He came in the spirit and in the power of Elijah. He's not literally Elijah risen from the dead. He's not Elijah reincarnated. But that's what he came to do. He came to prepare the way. And so they understood that. And it amazes me, they understood it. And yet so many people today act like they can understand it. And sometimes, of course, they just don't want to. But they got it. When Jesus says that, they go, oh, John the Baptist, that was Elijah. Spirit and power of Elijah. They did with him whatever they wanted. That's what they're going to do with the Son of Man. Now, when you get to verse 14, by the way, Jesus again here predicts his suffering. They don't always fully understand that, but he does predict it again there at the end of verse 12. Verses 14 through 21, Jesus is going to cast out this demon after the apostles had tried and failed. It seems like while they're coming down, now, again, you're putting the accounts together. In Luke's account, we learn that they actually were on the mountain overnight. So they're coming down the next day. They may have come down a little ways and camped and then finished the next day, but we just know it was the next day that they're coming down. Was it that morning? Was it the previous day? We don't know. Sometime while they were on the mountain, or at least coming down the mountain at the very least, the disciples were trying to cast out a demon. They couldn't do it. So here comes this man. He's the father of this boy. And he comes to Jesus. He kneels down. Lord, have mercy on my son. He's lunatic, sore vexed. Oftentimes he fallen into the fire, oft into the water. I brought him to your disciples, but they couldn't cure him. And of course, Jesus says, O faithless and perverse generation, how long shall I be with you? How long shall I suffer you? Bring him hither to me. Now, did I not write that down? Let me look. I think it's in Mark's account. Mark's parallel is in Mark 9. I always find myself coming to class and I got so many notes and I'm trying to cover as much as I can, and I say, next week I'm going to bring less notes with me. It's just hard to whittle stuff out sometimes. But then the one thing I needed to write down that I wanted to make a point, here I come, but I can't. It's probably in there and I just don't see it. 9. Yeah, the scribe, he saw a great multitude about them, the scribes questioning with them, so it's a little bit further down if I'm in the right place. Yes, it's Mark 9:23. So Jesus makes this statement about this. He says, faithless, perverse generation. Just making the point here, he's rebuking those of his generation whose faith was weak. Who manifests a weak faith in this context? Well, we know the disciples did to some extent because they couldn't cast out the demon. Some folks, and the reason I'm making this point from Mark 9 is because one of the guys that I read was looking at just different folks' comments on the verses, made the point. He says he's not rebuking the father. The father had faith. He brings the child to Jesus, and he did have some measure of faith, but so did the disciples. But here in Mark's account, he says, verse 22, oftentimes it's cast him into the fire and into the waters to destroy him. But if thou canst do anything, have compassion on us and help us. Jesus said unto him, and I believe the punctuation is not right in the King James. And understand, most manuscripts, when you start looking at the Greek manuscripts that have been discovered, of course we don't have any of the originals, but far more often than not, there's little or no punctuation in them. And so it's very difficult sometimes to determine. We're sometimes, especially in formal writing, we're very meticulous about punctuation and things like that. They just weren't. And if you get an unsealed manuscript, what we call unseals, and that simply is just a fancy way of saying essentially what we would call written in all caps, there are a lot of times even less punctuation. So all that just to say, it's very difficult to determine sometimes. But I think, in fact, anybody got, Connors, it got a question mark in the ESV there in verse 23? I know you got an ESV. Is there a question mark? If thou can, or if you can?
And Jesus said to him, and then it's like a quote within a quote, if you can, with an exclamation point.
If you can, with an exclamation point. So yeah, basically, and I think that's it. The New King James, I can't recall if they have that or not. But it's like Jesus is saying, we might even have it punctuated in our, if we were writing it out today with a question mark and an exclamation mark. The guy says, look, if you can, just do anything. Please help us. And Jesus goes, it's almost like we might, if we were, hearing it audibly, might be like, if you can? Like, do you know who you're talking to? If I can? Are you serious? As if to say, don't, I know it might be a lot of effort for you. I know it might be difficult. It's kind of like, I don't know if you're able to or not. And Jesus is saying, if you can. And then the word believe there will be starting a new sentence. And that's how it is in the ESV, right? After he says, if you can, exclamation mark, believe, all things are possible for one who believes. So the NIV has the question mark there. And so that's the idea. It's like he's saying, if I can? Are you serious? You believe, and all things are possible to the one who believes. And what's the Father's statement after that? I mean, give him credit. He cried out and he says what? With tears, Lord, I believe, help thou my unbelief. I read that, and to me that's a pretty neat thing in and of itself, because some people might say, well, you don't have to get so snippy about it or something like that. And he cries out with tears and says, I do believe, but help me, help my unbelief. In other words, kind of like the apostles say on another occasion, increase our faith. He says, I believe, but I want more faith. Help me, Lord. It's a cry of a father who cares about his son. He wants to see his son healed. But yeah, he understands. And he did. He had some measure of faith. And so he understood. He knows where to go. It's kind of like when the apostles are on the ship and the storm is coming, and Jesus will kind of rebuke them, where's your faith? Because they were so frightened. But at the same time, they did have some faith, right? Because they're not throwing stuff overboard trying to lighten the load or whatever. They go and wake up Jesus. Can you do something? So they got some faith, right? We know that. Yes, sir.
So, Chad, do you believe that if you take care of yourself, you'll get better from eating, drink the coffee, and have the lozenges? Do you believe that?
Do I believe if I take care of myself that I'll get better? Yes. Sure. I don't know where this is going.
You're not going to just get on to yourself and yell at yourself and look at the mirror and say, you're not better.
Right.
You recognize the state of health. Well, this man recognized it was laid on him right before him. Just loves his son. He recognized he may not be where he needs to be. Okay? So we're all in that shape. What we got to do is do what we need to do to increase our faith, whatever that is.
Absolutely. I think that's a good point, that we are all this man in some ways. He realizes, don't take away from what he's got going for him here, because he goes to the master. He goes to the Savior. He's a father. He loves his son. He wants his son to be cured. He knows who can handle that. And he went to the disciples. And then, he kind of ran it up the chain, and he's going to the boss man now. And Jesus lays it out for him. You're not quite where you need to be with your faith. Of course, who is, right? And that's why I say, or what Bob was saying, we're all that guy in one sense. But in his humility, he says, Lord, I believe, help my unbelief.
So in verse 17, who is Jesus addressing? The disciples and this man?
I think he's probably addressing all of them. There's, basically whoever's in earshot. And that's the reason I point that out, because some people will say, oh, it wasn't the Father, because the Father brings us, but the Father was lacking in faith to some extent as well. We all are in that crowd to some extent. And so we're all a work in progress. That's how we sometimes will word that. So Jesus rebukes the demon, departed out of him, the child was cured from that very hour. And of course the apostles now want to know, they're kind of going probably kind of quietly to Jesus, hey, what's going on? Why could we not cast him out? Of course, Jesus had given the apostles power to cast out demons. And Jesus just tells them flatly, just the same way as he did the father of that child, because of your unbelief. Now, when we hear that, we hear because of your unbelief, we hear like because you don't believe in Jesus, that he's the Messiah. That's not the case with them. I think we all understand that, but just pointing that out. We might say because of your lack of faith. It's not just complete and utter lack of faith, but it's not where it needs to be, not as much as it needs to be. Yes, sir.
I think one thing that this also kind of illustrates is like the Father says, if there's anything you can do to help us, and Jesus is like, if I can, and he wants him to increase. Like the Father has faith enough to know that if anybody can do something, it's Jesus. But I think that the idea that Jesus is getting at here when he's talking to the Father, when he's talking to the disciples, is he doesn't want you to have this attitude that if anybody can do something, it's going to be him. Because I think that still leaves a little bit of room for if nothing can be done, then it's a bigger problem than God.
Right.
And Jesus wants us to understand that there's no problem big enough for him when we approach him, like through prayer, or we're asking him for these things, and we're telling him these things. He wants us to know within our heart and train ourselves within our minds to really believe the things that we're going to ask him for are going to happen. He wants faith to be an integral part of not, well, if anybody can fix this problem, it's God. It's going to be, I know that God can fix this problem, so I need to run to him.
Like he's bigger than any problem. And I think that's, to kind of paraphrase what Connor was saying, is that, a great lesson here is, it's almost like the Father has this idea of, well, if anybody can help, Jesus can. We might say it this way. You might have something that, you might have something going on with your car, and you've been to 2 or 3 mechanics, nobody understands it, they can't seem to figure it out. And you might know the best mechanic, and you might tell somebody, look, take it to Robert, and listen to me. If Robert can't fix that thing, can't nobody fix it. And so, you may get there and Robert might say, I don't know. And at that point, you just go, oh, well. And it's almost like that's what the dad's thinking here. I'm going to Jesus. If he can't do it, well, I guess it's just nothing that can be done. And Jesus is going, if I can't do it, you think there's something I can't do? He's God in the flesh. There is no problem too big for him. There's nothing he can't handle. And it's, again, it's the idea with us, as Connor pointed out, taking our problems to God, understanding he's bigger than all our problems. It's not just, if anybody can do anything, God can. Maybe. He says, no, believe. Have faith. God is our plan A. And there is no plan B. That's the idea. And so the disciples, they want to know why they couldn't cast out the demon themselves. And he said, it was your lack of faith. You need to grow in your faith. Nothing is going to be impossible if you have that kind of faith. This kind goeth not out but by prayer and fasting. And the idea of prayer and fasting being ways to increase faith. He's always telling them, you got to grow in your faith. And guess what? That's still just as true today. We got to be growing our faith. We're going to be pleasing in God's sight. All right, we'll pick up in verses 22 and 23, Lord willing, next week with Jesus again predicting his death and resurrection. And then close out the chapter with Jesus and Peter paying the temple tax with some money that they're going to find in a strange place. But Jesus knew all along where they were going to get it. All right, we'll pick up there, Lord willing, next week. Thank you very much. Yes, sir.
screen and in the bulletin. You asked to continue to monitor that. That's Cheryl's back with us. Glad to see her. R.T. Nunley, friend of the Presleys, and others that have been on our prayer list. Greg Woody, Grant McGukin, who's better, Juanita Wilkes, and Chet, not doing well. Your prayers requested on their behalf. We send our sympathy to Betty Gray and family in the passing of Leroy Hunt. Was this your uncle, Betty? Uncle. Leroy Hunt, member of the church. He's been here a few times. He was at Carrollton and most recently at Waco. But Leroy Hunt passed away yesterday. Visitation is tomorrow from 6 to 8 p.m. at Miller's Funeral Home in Tallapoosa. Funeral is Friday, 1 p.m. at the Waco Church Building for Leroy Hunt. Our sympathy to that Hunt family. Okay, several events. Group 3, Billy and Cindy's Brothers Keepers meeting is at their home this Saturday at 4 p.m. Billy and Cindy, Group 3, at their home this Saturday. Potluck dinner for the newcomers this Sunday after the morning worship service. The MLK Gladiators hockey game. If you're going, Chad needs to know, or the money. You need the money tonight? Need to know. If you're going, let Chad know tonight so that plans can be made accordingly. Area-wide singing will be here before you know it. It's the last Friday of this month, January the 28th, 7 p.m. We'll host all the area-wide folks for our singing, and we'll do the finger foods after the singing. Our Men's Day is the last Saturday of this month, January 29th. Looking forward to that. There is the Momentum Youth Rally that Johnny will be taking some kids from here to, is that's Friday and Saturday, right, Johnny? Going on Saturday. That'll be Saturday the 30th, 29th. Also, the Last of the Leaders registration, need those forms back tonight. Johnny is still awaiting that information. All right, Brother Ethan.
Sometimes you're trying to get somebody's attention. It works to ask them a question or make a statement to make them stop and think about something. If you will, look in Acts chapter 8 with me. We all know the story of the Ethiopian eunuch. We're going to pick up in verse 35. Then Philip opened his mouth and began at the same scripture and preached to him Jesus. And as they went on their way, they came into a certain water. And the eunuch said, "See, here's water. What doth hinder me to be baptized?" So the first question tonight is there something that hinders you? Is there something that stands in your way of doing what you need to do? If we look in Matthew chapter 8, verse 21, it speaks of another disciple said unto the Lord, "Suffer me to first go and bury my father." But Jesus said unto him, "Follow me, let the dead bury their dead." This man asked Jesus, "I'll follow you, but first let me go do this." Fill in the blank, whatever that is. What's more important than following Jesus? Are we putting something in front of following Jesus? Are we putting that in second place? If we look at Matthew chapter 6, it says, "But seek ye first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, and all these things shall be added to you." We seek his kingdom first, everything else take care of itself. But we can't put it second or behind that. If we look in Matthew chapter 19, the story we know is the rich young ruler. This man comes to Jesus and said, "Master, what good thing shall I do that I may have eternal life?" He's asking the right questions. And Jesus tells them to keep the commandments, and they discuss the commandments for a minute. But this man says, "All these things have I kept up from my youth up. What lack I yet?" He's still asking the right questions. He's talking to Jesus himself, asking, what do I need to do? He's on the right track. Jesus said unto him, "If that will be perfect, go and sell that thou hast, and give to the poor, and thou shalt have treasure in heaven, and come and follow me." Jesus knew this man, and he knew what was standing in his way. The next verse says, "But when the young man heard that saying, he went away sorrowful, for he had great possessions." Those possessions hindered this man from following Christ. Christ even told him, you go sell the stuff you got here, there's treasure in heaven. But he couldn't let go of that. That was standing in his way. In Mark 8, verse 36 and 37, for what shall it profit a man if he gain the whole world and lose his own soul? Or what shall a man give in exchange for his soul? This man exchanged those possessions for his soul. We don't know. Later, maybe he changed his mind. I hope he did. But at that time, he walked away from Christ because he couldn't give something up. If we look in Matthew chapter 4, Jesus is calling the fishermen. These men walked away from everything. They left the nets, some of them in the water. The sons of Zebedee left their father sitting in the boat. They walked away to follow Christ. We're all familiar with Acts chapter 2. In verse 37, now when they heard this, they were pricked in their hearts and said unto Peter and the rest of the apostles, men and brethren, what shall we do? That's the next question. What do we do? We all know the next verse. Peter answers that question. And 3,000 souls were saved that day. So let's go back to the Ethiopian eunuch. He just asked Philip, what hinders me from being baptized? Philip's answer. Philip said, if thou believest with all thy heart, thou mayest. And he answered and said, I believe that Jesus Christ is the Son of God. And he commanded the chariot to stand still, and they went down both into the water, both Philip and the eunuch, and he baptized him. And they were come out of the water, the Spirit of the Lord called away Philip, that the eunuch saw him no more, and he went on his way rejoicing. The eunuch had asked a question, what hinders me? Philip's answer is nothing. If you believe, you can. That's the same thing for us. We've just been studying the Word of God in Bible class. That's the whole idea, is to understand what's there. How much more study of God's Word have each of us had versus what this eunuch even had? But when he heard the answer, he acted on it. So tonight, is there anything hindering you? You're letting something stand in your way, whether it's to become a Christian or to faithfully follow. Is whatever that is more important than making it to heaven? That's an easy question to answer. The answer is no. So one more question. In Acts 22, Ananias asked Paul a question. He said, now why tarriest thou? What are you waiting for? Arise and be baptized and wash away thy sins, calling on the name of the Lord. Ananias Paul knew what to do. He asked him, what are you waiting for? Why are you putting this off? So tonight, is there something standing in your way? Is there something you lack? If it's knowledge, we can help you there. Like they asked in Acts 2, what do you need to do? Each of us is in a different place, and we mentioned it in class. Everybody, this is a work in progress. We're each in a different place. We may need different things. What is it that you need to do? And the last question is, what are you waiting for? There's nothing standing in your way, but maybe fear. Well, if God's for you, who can be against you? Get on the right side of things. You know, if it's fear, look, water's warm, I promise. We checked it Sunday. There's extra clothes here. Don't let small things hinder you. You can be right with God and go home rejoicing, just like that eunuch went home rejoicing. If there's any need that we can help you with, don't hesitate. Don't let things stand in your way. Please come and see if we can assist you.